Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Romina Ichon. Our guest this week is Lance Izumi, PRI Senior Director of Education Studies. PRI just released a new book, A Kite in a Hurricane No More, co-written by Lance and Mia Giordano. The star of the book is Mia, a young woman who overcame her learning disabilities through science and educational choice. The conventional public school system couldn't help Mia, but through hard work and persistence, she nevertheless prevails. Mia and Lance bring her story to life as she discusses her challenges and why parents need more educational choice options that meet the needs of their children. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Next Round, Lance.
It's great to be here with you, Ro, and with you, Tim.
Lance, you're about to release a terrific new book profiling the challenges and triumph of Mia Giordano, who overcame serious learning disabilities thanks to her ability to choose a non-traditional learning option. Before we dive into her story and the policy issues surrounding it, introduce our listeners to Mia and share some of the struggles that she faced.
Well, thanks, Ro. I appreciate it. First of all, I want to just say that this book is probably one of the books I'm most passionate about, and I really had the greatest joy in actually writing. Mia is actually my co-author on the book, and working with her was really one of the best experiences I've really had in my professional career. It was really through her that I was really able to understand a facet of education that had really not been my specialty up till now. Mia's currently, just for our audience, Mia is currently a senior at Design Tech, which is a charter high school in Redwood City. And she's a really extremely accomplished, high-achieving, and vivacious young woman. And you'd never know that when she was a small child in elementary school, that she had really very severe learning disabilities, which were the result of a health condition that actually affected her brain. And these learning disabilities ranged from a very pronounced stutter that she had to not being able to process what she was hearing. So, for example, she would have to ask her teachers to repeat instructions because her brain was not able to process what the teacher was saying. Also, her brain was not processing what she was seeing visually, so she had a very poor hand-eye coordination, and she couldn't really stay within the lines of writing paper, and her writing was really generally a mess. Also, she couldn't really understand what she was reading, and she couldn't even understand what she was seeing on television. I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast have heard of the movie, the Bee Movie with Jerry Seinfeld and Renee Zellweger. Well, that was actually Mia's favorite movie, but even with her favorite movie, she really couldn't understand the flow of the storyline of the movie. In fact, in an exercise in elementary school, which she was given, where she had these 4 cards with pictures on them, and she was asked to put them in order to make a logical story, she simply couldn't figure out how to put those 4 cards together. And so, because of these learning disabilities, Mia was really teased and bullied at school. I mean, it's a very sad part of our book. Kids stayed away from her, and they groaned in class when she was asking the teacher to repeat something. It's the kind of thing that kids, of course, you can see young kids doing that. And Mia tells of this one instance. It's a really, really sad instance where one of her classmates makes up this song about her that went, "Mia is dumb, dumb, dumb." And of course, it made Mia very, very sad. But on the other hand, and this is one of the great things about this book, is Mia said that it made her stronger as well. And this book is really about how Mia overcame these challenges and then ended up having this personal triumph, and how science and public policy are all intertwined with her individual story.
Lance, in your book, you document the real struggles that Mia went through trying to overcome her learning disability while attending conventional public and private schools. So how are traditional schools failing to help students like Mia today? Is it an issue of funding, or is it a deficiency in their approach to learning?
Well, Tim, there are a couple of really major ways that conventional schools fail to meet the needs of children like Mia. But first of all, many simply don't know what to do with someone like Mia. The first public school that Mia attended really couldn't figure out what was going on with Mia, and the principal actually told Mia's mom that Mia's issues stemmed from her being a gifted child, which was a totally wrong evaluation. So when Mia was placed in a conventional private school, though, the school told her and her family that she had learning disabilities disabilities, but she would have to live with those disabilities. And the school thought that Mia had like an attention deficit disorder, which she did not, and actually had to go to one of her own personal doctors in order to get an evaluation to then bring a note back to the school to prove to them that she did not have, they thought she had. So the other thing too is that most conventional schools have really only one way of addressing learning issues that people like Mia have. They push what's called compensating strategies. So if you're weak in one area, they stress emphasizing those areas where you have strength. So for example, when Mia had trouble reading, she used pictures in the book to help her understand the story she was reading. Of course, this compensating strategy doesn't actually improve her reading abilities, but Mia's mom, I think very rightly said that these compensating strategies just really put a Band-Aid on her problems. And I think really, people need to understand that the underlying problem here is that the conventional schools, especially the public schools, have bought into this particular paradigm that stresses these compensating strategies. I interviewed an education psychologist for this book who had worked for years in the public school system, and she said that all of the thinking, the teacher training, and the revenue streams that are all geared to support this one paradigm of compensating strategies, that paradigm is the be-all and end-all within their public school system. And it didn't really matter if there were other strategies, other methods that actually helped students like Mia, because everything was geared to this one strategy. So this education psychologist says that because the system is geared to this one strategy of emphasizing compensating strategies, that the educators who are in the system will simply accept this paradigm without any questions. And so therefore they accept that a person's limitations are basically a lifelong condition. And she said that the education establishment believes that strength and weaknesses can never be changed. And because they are wedded to this one worldview of learning disabilities, even if another paradigm or treatment proves to be more successful, it would actually be impossible for the public school system to change, to embrace something that was better and more successful.
Lance, you write in great detail in the book about the promise shown by advanced brain research in helping students with learning disabilities to help overcome them. Can you share some of what you've learned about the brain and how we learn as people?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting part for me to write in this book because, up to this point, I had known a bit about brain research, but, reading about all the new developments in brain research was really, eye-opening for me. And, there are actually really two important things to really know about the brain. First of all, that the brain has really many different areas that are linked to particular functions. What I found out was that the German pioneering anatomist, his name is Corbinian Brodmann, identified 52 different areas of the brain. So, for example, areas 41 and 42 are the primary auditory areas of the brain. And so what's crucial to our understanding of the brain is that these areas are really not isolated, but they actually work together. So the complex behaviors and mental processes that we engage in, like reading or speaking or writing, are the result of the interactions of all these brain areas, and each area makes its contribution to the whole functioning system. And because these brain areas are interconnected, problems in brain areas will have a domino effect that will impact numerous different functions and result in things such as learning disabilities that Mia experienced. The other thing that I found, though, is that there is a lot of hope. One of the other important points that we know about the brain is that it's not static. It's capable of changing, and there may be weak areas of the brain and strong areas, but it is very possible to strengthen these weak areas. And this concept of the brain being able to change is called neuroplasticity. And it's this concept that Mia used to change her brain and to change her life.
Lance, Mia benefited from being able to enroll in the Aerosmith Program, which you describe helped her undergo a, quote, life-changing metamorphosis. So what is the Aerosmith Program, and how is it helping students overcome their learning disabilities?
Well, so Tim, the Aerosmith Program is the literal brainchild of Barbara Aerosmith Young, and she's a Canadian woman who had severe learning disabilities similar to what Mia had experienced. And so when reading a textbook, for example, Barbara Aerosmith would read a passage 100 times in order to understand what it said. You can imagine that, having to overcome these types of challenges or facing these types of challenges day in and day out is extremely difficult for a young person. And she was so depressed because of her learning disabilities that she actually attempted suicide when she was 13. And when she was in her 20s, she was actually planning to throw herself off a subway platform in Toronto in front of an oncoming train. But thankfully, she had actually stumbled upon a book about a soldier who had received a brain injury during World War I and who had problems that really reminded her of her own problems. And she therefore decided that what she needed to do was to improve her own brain functioning. And so she thought about, the deficiencies she saw in her brains. And so she started with looking at clocks. And the reason why she wanted to look at clocks was because she couldn't really read the hands of a clock. And so therefore she drew hundreds of different clock faces on cards, and she shuffled the cards and would force herself to read them and identify the time and the second and all this sort of thing. And she did this exercise over and over again. And after a few months, she actually found that she could read the clock faces with no problem. And one of the other things she found out was because she could read the clock faces, and because the brain areas are interconnected, she was not only able to tell time on the clock, she ended up being able to understand dialogue on television, to do math, and understand abstract subjects like philosophy. In fact, she remembers going to the library and pulling down 100 different philosophy books off the shelves and being amazed that she could understand what was written in all of them. And, I think one of the great things about Barbara Aerosmith is that, when she experienced this personal triumph, she didn't try to keep it to herself. She wanted to share it with the world. And so therefore she created this Aerosmith program, which is based on the various exercises that are geared to strengthen weak parts of the brain so that the brain ends up as a strong whole. The Aerosmith program identifies 19 different learning dysfunctions, and each of these have specific exercises that are designed to strengthen the brain areas responsible for these dysfunctions. There have been various studies on the Aerosmith program, and they show that the program really does improve the abilities and achievement of those going through it. For this book, I interviewed Dr. Greg Rose, who is one of the top neuroscientists in America and who has studied the Aerosmith program. And one of the things that he found was that there were many improvements in the students who were going through this program, the Aerosmith program, and validating basically what Barbara found out in her own personal life. He said that just looking at clock faces all day ended up helping students count backwards by 7 and write sentences better. It's an achievement not only for Barbara Aerosmith, but the program itself, it has shown great success overall.
Mia was able to enroll in the Aerosmith program at a learning center near her home on the San Francisco Peninsula. You write about students in other states and communities who could benefit from programs like the Aerosmith program and who won't be able to enroll due to financial and policy roadblocks. What are some of these obstacles to helping students with learning disabilities get the education they deserve?
Well, Mia's mom enrolled Mia in the Aerosmith program after the conventional schools had failed to address Mia's underlying problems. And she attended this small Aerosmith Learning Center in the Bay Area for 4 years, and she really emerged an absolutely changed person. Aerosmith had diagnosed her weaknesses in her brain and the learning dysfunctions from which she was suffering. So she was given a regimen of exercises, which she would repeat over and over, just like Barbara Aerosmith did when she first started the program, in order to retrain her brain. Mia would trace increasingly more delicate figures, repeat ever more difficult phrases, and tell time on clocks with up to 10 hands. She went to the Aerosmith program, for 4 years. And when she started the program, she couldn't read or understand the stories. But by the time she left Aerosmith, she had actually read 53 books in the summer before the last year of her program. Now, from the public policy point of view, and getting to your question, Ro, the question is how to make an effective program like Aerosmith available to all children who would benefit from it. Aerosmith is a private program, and there is a cost attached to it, although it is reasonable. Mia's family could afford to put her in that program, but other families may not have similar means. So really the two big obstacles for family to access a program like Aerosmith are, one, the cost, and two, the general lack of state and local programs that would help families address this cost issue.
In the book, Mia writes that it's her hope that millions of children who have learning disabilities are given the educational choice to select programs like the Aerosmith program so they can also get on the path to a bright future. So why is school choice so important for children with learning disabilities?
Well, there are really important reasons, Tim, why we need school choice in order to address children with learning disabilities. First of all, is the issue I discussed earlier, which is the inability of the public schools to deviate from this single paradigm on which they're operating. This paradigm, as I said earlier, emphasizing the use of these compensating strategies to only address the strong parts of your brain, never improve or strengthen the weak parts of your brain, and they therefore ignore the scientific research that says the brain is able to change, and it also ignores the positive results of programs like Aerosmith, which uses a totally different paradigm. So for children who have not been helped by this conventional paradigm, they really need this access to different learning models, which may be at private schools or in specialized learning programs like at Aerosmith. And they can only have this access if there are school choice programs that give parents the means to do so. I interviewed Dr. Ann Weissman for this book. She's the director of Wellness and Integrated Health at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Medical School. And she emphasized that equity really demands that all children have the ability to access programs like Aerosmith, not just for those families who can afford it. And so when we think of school choice programs, we think oftentimes of the ability of children to improve their achievement, improve their learning, and that's important. But it's also to give the ability of all children, regardless of their family income backgrounds, the ability to access these programs that will help them in the long run.
Lance, what are some of your policy reform recommendations to ensure that every child like Mia has the school choice options they deserve?
Well, in the last chapter of our book, Ro, we dedicate it to examining the policy options that can ensure that all children have this opportunity that Mia had to succeed. That addresses these equity issues that I just mentioned. One of the really promising programs is the Gardner School Choice Scholarship Program in Florida. And now this Gardner program gives families with special needs an education savings account, which is funded by the state and which can be used by parents to pay for programs like Aerosmith. Because of this Gardner program, there are a number of private schools across Florida that offer the Aerosmith program. And one of the things that in this last chapter of the book, I describe a number of the students who are going to the Aerosmith programs at these private schools in Florida and who are using the Gardner Scholarship in order to pay for the program, and they are doing incredibly well. Parents are saying that their kids are, less frustrated, their achievement is much better, they're much happier, and all these things are available because they have this school choice program called the Gardner Scholarship in Florida. But unfortunately, in most states, including California, for example, we don't have programs like the Gardner Scholarship program, which makes it impossible for families to access a program like Aerosmith, which could make all the difference in the world for these children. It's especially disappointing to find out that the small Aerosmith Learning Center that Mia attended is no longer in operation, that there's actually no place in California that currently offers Aerosmith. And how sad is that we're talking about a California young person, Mia Giordano, who was so helped by this incredible Aerosmith program, and yet now, because of public policy deficiencies in California, there's no way for other children to access this highly successful Aerosmith program.
Lance, Mia's story has a happy ending. Tell us about how she's flourishing after successfully completing the Aerosmith program and what her future plans are.
Well, Tim, Mia said that when she entered the program, she felt like she was like a car stuck in traffic. But by the time she graduated from Aerosmith, she said that she felt like a Ferrari on the open highway. She felt that everything was happening like lightning speed in her brain. So one of the most heartwarming stories that Mia tells is how in her fourth year in Aerosmith, she was able to give to others and help those who were just beginning in the program. She met this one young woman who had enrolled in the Aerosmith program and who had many of the same learning problems that Mia had experienced. Now, this woman was actually in her 20s, and Mia was just 13 years old at the time. But Mia was actually able to mentor this young woman. And to me, this part of the book is one of the most moving parts. So I'm actually going to quote Mia for this to really show, how important Aerosmith was and what it meant to her, and how she was able to then, be this messenger and this tutor for Aerosmith. And Mia said that I would do phrases with this young woman. I would say the phrase to her, and she would had to repeat it back to me correctly 3 times. I would give her advice on how to remember the phrases. I was actually teaching her, and we started to build a relationship where I was more like a mentor for her, even though she was significantly older than me. We would have meaningful conversations. She progressed really well. And in the end, our age gap disappeared from our consciousness. The older students said that I gave them hope because I was so young and because of how terrible things were for me when I first started the program. Adult students complimented me, saying that the stories I told and the way I spoke made them forget that I was only 13 years old. I was proof that for them, they could succeed too. That 4th year in Aerosmith was the best conclusion I could have ever hoped for. So now Mia is a highly accomplished young woman who is ready to attend a university next year. But Mia is really cognizant still of how educational choice helped her to overcome her challenges. And so she says, if my family didn't have the ability to make these choices in my education that would meet my specific needs, right now I would just be an older version of 3rd grade Mia, stuck in time and definitely depressed. And I think that one of the most hopeful things about our book is actually the title of one of the concluding chapters, where Mia says that in her life and when she looks at her future, it's like the trademark line from Buzz Lightyear in Disney's Toy Story movie, which where Buzz says, "To infinity and beyond." And that's really how Mia feels right now. And it's a really positive and inspiring way to end this book.
Lance, in addition to your new book, you're also about to release a new brief on the new obstacles facing charter schools from opponents like Governor Gavin Newsom. And once a charter school supporter, Joe Biden has done an about-face by appointing avowed charter school foes to key positions in his administration. Give our listeners a preview of your brief and the kinds of policies we should expect in a Biden administration.
Well, thank you, Ro. My brief that is upcoming focuses on emerging challenges to charter schools. Now, charter schools have had a lot of good news recently. There have been some important studies that have been released by Harvard University and others that have shown that charter schools really outperforming their traditional public school peers. And so, that charter schools are doing a really good job in improving the education for young people, especially amongst those from minority and lower income backgrounds. Also, too, unfortunately, on the flip side of the coin, and in this briefing, I started off by saying it's like Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, where it's the best of times and the worst of times. So on the one hand, it is the best of times. Charter schools are doing a great job. It is fortunately the worst of times because they're coming up against a lot of challenges that they hadn't come up against previously. There have been efforts to basically defund charter schools. Here in California, the legislature and the governor have enacted laws and funding formulas that have reduced funding for charter schools, especially for those that are growing charter schools. We've seen efforts to defund charter schools or reduce funding for charter schools that are basically online charter schools that are virtual based, and which is bizarre considering that so many parents are now having to use distance learning to educate their children. And you have these charter schools that specialize in online distance learning, and yet in some states you're seeing them having reduced funding. So the government, on the one hand, is responsible for putting up more and more roadblocks to charter schools, but also, too, you have special interest groups like the teachers' unions that are becoming much more aggressive against charter schools. And so you've seen over the last couple years or so, strikes by teachers across the country, and the unions have demanded, in addition to wages and benefits, which are the usual reasons for strikes, but they've actually demanded in many of these cases that charter schools either be stopped or that a cap be placed on the numbers of charter schools. And so these strikes are explicitly directed at a public policy issue, not just about conditions of their own members, but at a public policy issues, the existence of these charter schools, which they see, of course, the unions see as competitors. So there are these big obstacles that are coming up against charter schools. And I think it's only going to get worse. Unfortunately, I wish I had better news, but I think it's only going to get worse, if Joe Biden eventually is sworn in as president of the United States. Because if you look at his own record, which, in many years past, he, supported charter schools, but during the campaign, he did an about face like he has done on so many different issues and flip-flopped and, campaigned against charter schools. And one of the prime candidates to be his next education secretary is actually Randi Weingarten, who is the current president of the American Federation of Teachers, one of the two large national teachers union. And she and her union have been vociferously anti-charter school, and to basically put the fox in charge of the hen house at the Department of Education, at least when it comes to charter schools, is just shocking and appalling to comprehend. And so, we'll see, what Joe Biden does, with that appointment. But it's very ominous to me that somebody like Randi Weingarten is even being seriously considered.
Thanks so much, Lance. I know you'll be following these issues closely in the months ahead, and we'll definitely have to have you back.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ro. I'll be happy to be back to give you updates on all of these.
Thanks to my colleagues Lance Izumi and Tim Anaya. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and now iHeartRadio and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's a number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.